Hey guys, Ezra here and welcome back to another Ezra review. And on today's review, I want to talk about 28 Days Later. Now, I did this review in preparation for 28 Years Later. And I remember seeing the 28 Years Later for the first time, like the trailer last year, I think, or like a couple of months ago. And that trailer was so good, especially the way they edited the trailer and they give you like the vibe for the movie without even spoiling the story for the movie, which I think is really, really rare because like trailers these days are completely spoiling the movies. And I think 28 years later managed to convince me that, oh, this is a great trailer and I want to see the movie, but I have to watch the first two movies, because I think why not, right? Because people has been speaking about 28 Days Later very, very highly. And I remember hearing about 28 Days Later during the zombie era, which is on the early 2000, but I haven't got the chance to watch them until, recently, a couple of months back. And I want to review this movie now and give my own thoughts and to say to and obviously to give you guys some ideas on why this movie was so influential on the zombie genre and how much that it completely changes how zombie was portrayed in movie media and maybe games as well. So 28 Days Later was directed by Danny Boyle and written by Alex Garland, and the idea was actually came from Alex Garland when he was, it was influenced by obviously George A. Romero's movie like Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead and possibly Day of the Dead as well. But he also played the video game Resident Evil way back in '96 and basically reminded him on how much he loved zombies, having not really encountering the movies for a while. So he decided to wrote this movie, and I think he has some influence on how the infection works. And the zombies in this movie is not exactly called zombie apparently, because apparently it was just people infected with virus, because zombies are usually known for being undead. And Alex Garland basically said that, well, this is just people getting infected by the rage virus and making them crazy and angry instead of like a zombie. But even then, it's like, I mean, they kind of behave like a zombie, so I'm gonna call them zombies in this movie review. I'm sorry, that's how I viewed them on 28 Days Later. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's a zombie movie at the end of the day, and yeah, it's really not hard to see why this movie are so influential on the zombie genre, especially how this movie introduced fast-paced zombie, or I guess running zombies. I don't think this is the first movie that feature a running zombie, but it is actually the movie that popularized running zombies. And pretty much after 28 Days Later, every single other zombies movie after 28 Days Later features fast running zombies, and all of that culminate in the 2013 movie starring Brad Pitt called World War Z, which is nothing like the book. It's just like an action zombie movie starring Brad Pitt, and that zombies in that movie, man, if you guys remember, it's just a bunch of ragdoll CGI zombies that's just like running super fast, and clearly was influenced by 28 Days Later, just like every single other zombie movies as well, like Zombieland, obviously. And yeah, it's absolutely amazing how much they make zombies much more scarier, and make them much more interesting compared to the typical George A. Romero zombies, because those zombies has their own moments in the 70s and 80s, but now I'm glad that Alex Garland and Danny Boyle decided to make a running zombies, and it clearly influenced or I guess starting the zombies era, and it's going on for a while, man. I remember the zombies era so well, because I lived through that and I kind of missed it, to be honest. So I'm glad that 28 years later are making a comeback this month, I guess. But anyway, getting to the actual movie reviews here after the influential part, I would say that this movie is absolutely great in terms of the characters and how they shot the movie as well, especially with the small budget of $8 million. And I especially love the opening shot with Cillian Murphy's character named Jim, which is also interesting that the actors in this movie are actually big A-list actor, but they just starting their careers in this movie, and I gotta say every single one of them did a good job. So Cillian Murphy playing Jim, which is like a bicycle courier who was previously in a coma for in this time span of 28 days later, and once he woke up, the infection already spread throughout the Great Britain, including London, obviously. And we have this one of the most amazing or like iconic shot of the movie where we see Jim walking around empty London. And I always love how you see like a places where usually they are full of people and life, and now they are completely devoid of people, which in my opinion that's way more scarier, and it does create a lot of like iconic imagery from this movie. I also love how they portray the scale of the infection in this movie by just on the opening sequence, because like again, you don't see any bodies or blood in the streets. There is some destruction on the streets, but there is an empty streets all in all, so that you don't see any people whatsoever, and that is way scarier in my opinion. And also you see that like the building you see in London are completely fine. Like usually when you are seeing like a zombies apocalypse movie, usually like there is a bunch of fires and the buildings breaking down, because obviously the destruction happens by the zombies. But for 28 days later, it's different, where you see the buildings are completely fine and you just see like an empty streets, which in my opinion, I think the less you see the destruction is actually much better. How they were able to sell the scale of the infection, and I absolutely love that. And also I also love the music that plays on the scenes, and it was like, yeah, it was absolutely great. But after this, Jim decided to head to the church, and we see another creepy scenes in my opinion, where we see a bunch of people sleeping in the church, which eventually they waking up and then like realizing that Jim was actually there, and Jim obviously doesn't know that these people are infected. So he was being chased by these people on the church, and I can only imagine watching this for the first time in 2002, man. It's gonna be scary, especially how this is like a fast running zombies, like wow. I also think that the resolution of the entire movies, I think, works really well to sell the atmosphere and the tone of the movie itself, because when I first watching it, I was like, the resolution seems to be something wrong with the resolution here, and I was like, oh, never mind, this is actually how it was intended for the movie. And that's what 28 Days Later feels like, a movie for its own era, which is 2002, especially post 9/11 stuff. And yeah, I think the resolution, even though it was like very, very low sometimes, and then maybe it could be a bit distracting, but I think it does work to build the atmosphere and the tone of the movie, in my opinion. And as just Jim ran away from the infected, he was saved by two survivors named Selena and Mark, and they're basically catching up to Jim that here's the situation throughout the entire Britain, and everybody was infected for 28 days later. And after like a whole month, I think most of people in Britain was infected, and Jim was obviously in denial. There has to be a government, there has to be somebody else out there to save us. But Selena and Mark convinced him that there is nobody came here to save us. We're on our own. And I gotta say, I think this movie has an interesting, I guess, like reference to like the George A. Romero movies, especially like the Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, and Day of the Dead, because the first act of this movie is like Night of the Living Dead, because the protagonist is like figuring out the infection, the zombie apocalypse, and he tries to adapt through that. And then Dawn of the Dead is like, it's like much more a fun sequel that happens in the mall, and that becomes the second act of this movie. And Day of the Dead is basically like the military style drama, which is the third act of this movie. So this movie, 28 Days Later, are essentially speed running George A. Romero classic Living Dead trilogy, and I love that because I love the classic trilogy by George A. Romero, and I think Day of the Dead are pretty underrated in my opinion. But yeah. Either way, I love that. And after this, so Jim, Selena, and Mark decided to visit Jim's parents' house, but apparently Jim's parents already committed suicide because of the infection, or rather like the entire situation of Britain, where there is no help, there's a bunch of people getting infected, so they rather die than getting infected, and leaving a note to their son, hoping that he doesn't wake up and suffers like they do. And this obviously broke Jim even further. But during his mourning in the house was actually attacked by two infected, and I remember watching this for the first time. It really shocked me because how loud the sound effect was, especially when the infected broken the glass. And Selena and Mark tried to fight off the infected, and they win, but Mark was bitten by the infected, and Selena doesn't even hesitate to hack Mark to death immediately, because like if you are infected with the race virus, then you only have like 10 to 12 seconds before you completely transform. And it was a really fast transformation, so it makes sense, you know, like this is fast running zombies and the infection only take like a couple of seconds. And yeah, you can clearly see why the Great Britain was completely wiped out by the infection. And Selena basically says to Jim that you need to be careful, you know, because if you actually getting bitten, then she will kill Jim in a heartbeat. And that line right there is becoming really important when you get to the third act of the movies, you know, which I think that's interesting because I never noticed that until I rewatched the movie, to be honest. But yeah, she's gonna kill Jim in a heartbeat. So there's that. After that, Jim and Selena decided to find another shelter, and then they found an apartment, and then they found two other survivors named Frank and Hannah, which is Frank's daughter. And before they being chased by the infected in the stairwell, and Frank decided to save them. And this is basically became our own group of survivors in this movie, and they decide to head off into the military station or something like that, you know, because like they received like a radio transmission, and obviously they cannot stay on the apartment because there is no water, there is no food, it's running out. So they have to take their chances and go to these specific places and hoping that the military can actually, you know, help them. And during this journey, the movie has so many amazing shots, you know, of like the car driving down an empty road. And this is why I love 28 Days Later, is the way they portray the zombie apocalypse world, that it feels like so, I don't know, it feels like beautiful, but also like kind of creepy at the same time. And it was really well shot, and I loved that a lot. But this is where the movie kind of becomes like Dawn of the Dead, you know, where you see the characters are shopping and they're having fun, you know, they buying a bunch of food. And after they do that, they decide to go to the tunnel, and then on that tunnel, suddenly the tires break down, and then they were chased by the infected, and this is becoming racing against time, where they have to fix the tire, and then before the infected gets them, and they managed to get away. But I think the scene kind of ended in an interesting way, in my opinion, because for the first time, you actually see the aftermath of the infection, the zombies running towards their target, you know, because usually when you are watching like a zombies movie, you see the zombies just keep running and running, even though that our protagonist was like far away. But on 28 Days Later, it's different, where the car wasn't even like far away, and then like the infected just completely given up, and it just like slowed down and like acting like a human being essentially, which I think is kind of interesting for me, you know, because this is the first time I ever witnessed that, and I remember feeling a bit weird seeing that, like, oh wow, okay, they're actually slowing down and acting like people in a way. But yeah, I absolutely love that, you know, for the first time we're seeing like what happens to the zombies after they fail to reach their target. And after this, we see again another cool shot of like the empty highway, which I love, and they finally reach their their destination. But sadly, when they get to their destination, we see like a bunch of military people are actually killed or like infected, you know. And sadly, on this scene, Frank make a mistake because he looks up like a body or something like that, and then like a blood drips into his eyes, and that basically infected Frank. Because remember, the race virus basically infected you in a couple of seconds, you know. And it's even more sad that his own daughter Hannah was actually right in front of Frank, and then he desperately tried to tell Hannah to get away from him. And sadly, Brendangleeson's character Frank was killed off by the military person because, well, he was infected, and this obviously traumatized Hannah and Selena. And yeah, I feel bad for Frank, you know, because it was just a stupid mistake that gets him killed. Like, he doesn't have to be killed, but it's just because of a stupid mistake that he looks up like a body, dripping blood, and then like he becomes infected. It's like, man, like his character deserves better, in my opinion, you know. But yeah, it's a really sad scene, in my opinion. But the military decided to take Jim and Selena and Hannah to like their mansion, where they try to hold up their position there, you know. They try to fight some infected during the nighttime. You see like this pretty cool scene, you know, where you see the military versus the zombies. They're using landmine, you know, and then they're shooting a bunch of zombies, and it kind of works, you know, at least for so far for them. And you know, I think at first I was like super relieved that, oh, finally our main character are in the hands of the military people, like everything should be fine, right? But no, because when they reach their destination, it becomes another nightmare, because the corporal, I think, Major Henry West, played by Christophereccleston, he revealed to Jim that that he promised woman to his man, because they've been stuck for a long time, and obviously they were, desperate for some, I guess, like sexual activity, and that's why they were expecting women as the survivors. And now they got Selena and Hannah, which is, yes, Hannah is just a kid, but they're planning to do something with her, like sexually assault her, which is like completely messed up. And Jim tried to save both Selena and Hannah, but he was knocked out, and then he was taken prisoner. And I think this is the first time we see, well, I guess we hear the information that the infection was only here on the Great Britain, because that's interesting also, because usually when you are, again, in the zombie movies, usually the infected was super worldwide. But I think on 28 days later, the infection was actually in the Great Britain, and I think the Great Britain was actually contained by the outside world, which is even more frustrating, because like they leave some survivors in the Great Britain and they have nowhere to go at this point because nobody is coming to help them. Either way, Jim managed to escape, and he decided to head to the previous place, where Frank dies, and then he decided to sound like the horn thing, and this obviously distracted the military people to go there. And then Jim in this scene are actually acting like Batman, surprisingly enough, or I guess like a slasher killer, and then he does kill a couple of like soldiers in here. And he decided to go back to the house after taking the rifles and free, like I think he decided to free like one infected person, because like because the military personnel has this one infected people in the mansion, because they want to figure out how long this thing will survive. And Jim decided to free this infected, and then obviously all chaos start in this mansion. And I gotta say, the scene in the end here is absolutely amazing. The way the direction, the editing, the music was synchronized all together really, really well. And obviously also with Cillianmurphy's acting as Jim, because now he was really, really angry after what the military personnel trying to do with Selena. And it's just like, yeah, it's fantastic scenes, man, and I love how the scene kind of slowly built, like there is a dark mansion, there is some infected running around, and obviously the score by John Murphy is absolutely amazing, especially the score name, In the House in a Heartbeat, which also callbacks to Selena's line in the beginning, and this is probably like the most well-known theme from 28 Days Later. Is absolutely amazing how the theme like slowly built, and then the scene and the acting are also slowly building up and then getting more and more intense as the scene goes by. And it eventually climaxes where we see Jim kill this one personnel, as he tries to assault Selena again. And I love the editing of this on this scene right here, because like when you see like the infection or like the zombies running around, the camera is always like shaking with them, because they're so fast, and then like they're just like completely insane and crazy and angry. So that's why the camera are like completely shaking around with the zombies, and then when you see Jim kill this one military personnel, the camera kind of becomes similar to how the zombies was portrayed throughout the entire movie, which is kind of like putting Jim as the same as the zombies in these movies, as the people who were infected by the race virus. And I absolutely love that. And I think this is the first time we see Jim kill someone on screen, where he just like pushing his two thumb against his eyes, which I don't think I can show that on YouTube, but it was absolutely gruesome, mixed with the song in the background. Like, oh my god, I love this scene a lot, And there is this moment, Selena decided to grab a machete and then prepare to kill Jim, but for the first time, she actually felt hesitate, because Jim and Selena actually became lovers throughout this entire journey, and then Selena was actually hesitating to kill Jim, but it was revealed that Jim was completely fine, But it's interesting how the movie kind of did that commentary that, there is these people infected by the rage virus, and then there's Jim who is not infected but could behave like a zombies, which I think that's interesting to see that, but either way, they decided to escape the military compound, the mansion or the house, but sadly during their getaway, Jim was actually get shot by the corporal, and then our Major Henry West. And Hannah, who is drunk because Selena actually gave a drug to Hannah when she was about to be sexually assaulted by the soldiers. She is drunk driving essentially, and then managed to kill Major Henry West, and they all got away, and it cuts to another 28 days later, and it was revealed that the infected are actually dying. After 56 days, they are dying of starvation, which is also interesting because in the zombies movie, usually the infected was completely fine after like so many years, and they could survive like hundreds or like dozens of years without eating any food. But 28 days later is different, because like the infected are actually dying and starving, kind of like how a normal human being would starve to death. And that is interesting in my opinion, because usually zombies are usually just completely unstoppable, but 28 days later actually make these zombies much more human in a way, and I think that's interesting for me. So they are dying for starvation, and we see our main survivors actually getting spotted by a jet, and presumably they are getting rescued by the jets, or I guess like the rescue team, because that's how the movie ends. So yeah, that was a great movies, great characters, great music, great directing. This movie, I mean, you can clearly see why this movie influenced a lot of like the zombies era or like the zombie genre. Even The Walking Dead stole from this movie, and it's probably the only media that has like a walking zombies. I mean, it's on the title, like, right? They're walking and they're dead. But yeah, I really love this movie, and I am so excited to watch 28 years later, and I'm really hoping it could be good, because the sequels after 28 days later, like, I think it's an okay sequel, but it's not exactly as good as the first one, because it doesn't actually feel like I don't know, like the first one has this lonely feelings, in the Great Britain, where there's a bunch of zombies running around, and you feel lonely in these movies, because there's only a couple of few characters in this movie. But 28 weeks later was completely different in a way. So I guess stay tuned for that reviews, like maybe 2 weeks after this, we'll see about that. But either way, guys, that's my review for 28 days later. I absolutely love this movie. So let me know your opinions in the comment section below. Like, what do you guys think about this movie? What is your favorite moment from this movie, and how do you guys think this movie influenced the zombie genre? Like, you guys can leave your opinions about that in the comment section below. And are you guys looking forward to 28 years later? Also leave your opinions in the comment section below. And either way, guys, that's my review, and if you guys enjoyed, then make sure to guys bite that subscribe and like button, share the videos, do so stuff. Stay tuned for 28 weeks later reviews in the future, and of course like 28 years later reviews in June. But either way, guys, that's my review for today, and again, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next one then. Bye.